Today we'll study welfare gains of multiple levels of government. Or this is also known as Theorem of Fiscal. We had discussed what are the welfare gains. So if you go for multiple levels of government, what is the benefits you get? So why it is better than a centralized system of government? Because someone can argue that one national government is sufficient. So why do we need say state governments, or why do we need the local governments? For that reason, in Indian context, you can say that why do we need so many panchayats or say urban local bodies? Whether it could be panchayat raj institutions or it could be urban local bodies. So why do we need those institutions? And this theorem is given by Wallace E. Force in 1972. In fact, I was also going through an article published in Journal of Economic Literature. But this is a book. Wallace has published a book on fiscal federalism in 1972. And other than that, there is a very good article on fiscal federalism in Journal of Economic Literature published in 1999. First of all, so we are going to discuss that what are the welfare gains if we go for multiple levels of government. So the theorem says that for a public good, it will be always beneficial for the local government to provide a Pareto efficient level of public good in their own jurisdiction than the central government providing any amount of public good at uniform level to all jurisdictions. Is that clear? Okay. But there is an assumption. Okay. There are two assumptions here. When we are saying that for any public good, it will always be beneficial for the local government to provide a Pareto efficient level of public good in its own jurisdiction than the central government providing any level of public good in all jurisdictions. That is a theorem. But then the assumptions are that there should be heterogeneity in the taste and preferences. Okay? And then second is that the cost of production, the marginal cost of production is similar, similar in all local governments. Suppose there are say 10 local governments. If you are allowing them to provide that public good in their own jurisdiction, the marginal cost of production remains same in all local governments. Okay? And we also assume that the taste and preferences are heterogeneous. They are not same. Okay? Because if they will become similar, then there is no point of decentralization. You can always go for uniform level of government, or you can say that central government. Okay? So the whole argument comes for the decentralization because the taste and preferences are heterogeneous. Okay? And similarly, the ability to pay would be different. Okay? The willingness to pay would be different. Okay? So there is heterogeneity in multiple indicators. Okay? And that is why we are talking about decentralization. Okay? And that is reality, right? So the theorem, the author, Wallace, or for that reason, any theory, when you say talk about the local governments, the main assumption is this. Okay, so now we can go to discuss that theorem with the help of a diagram. We are assuming, for simplicity, we are now taking into consideration only two jurisdictions. Okay? You can expand it to multiple regions, okay? But for simplicity, we are now taking two regions, and say the taste and preferences would be different into different regions, and we can say that the taste and preferences can be shown through demand curves. Okay? Suppose this is the demand curve of say individual B, and this is the demand curve for individual A, and say individual A and individual B are two representative individuals. Now, what is two representative individuals? That means there are individuals who have similar preferences living in a certain region. Okay? So that's why we are saying that A is a representative individual who is representing a particular pattern of say consumption. Similarly, B is another representative consumer who is representing the taste and preferences of a group of people. Okay? And that is quite normal assumption we can take. Now, if I ask you, like, between A and B, who is a rich consumer? Who has higher ability to pay? If you look at these two demand curves, now who is a relatively better off individual in terms of say income, or who has higher ability to pay? DA, right? Now why? Because if you see say a price, okay, say if you take any price, now you see that consumer B is consuming less quantity, but consumer A will be consuming higher quantity. And if you take say one point here, say at this point, the demand curve consumer B doesn't exist, right? If you go even higher, little higher, if you stretch it, if you stretch the demand curve, then at this point the demand curve for A exists, but demand curve for B doesn't exist because you can pay for it, right? So that's by simply looking at the demand curves, you can say that who is a rich consumer and who is a poor consumer. In fact, in some other class we might have discussed that, or even we are saying that ability to pay also different. When ability to pay is different, the provision of public goods also would be different. Okay, so for example, if you will have to pay a user fee in certain region, people would demand say provision of say Wi-Fi connection in a panchayat, okay, where you will have to pay certain fee. So just like we are paying holding tax in a local government, we may pay a user fee for Wi-Fi. Okay? But if you take your own Wi-Fi connection, you may have to pay a little higher amount, say 2,000 rupees. But if you take in a group for a panchayat as a whole, you may pay say 100 rupees per month. Okay? So that makes a case for common provision of some public goods, and here Wi-Fi would be such a case. But this 100 rupees can be probably paid by some other people where the income standard is quite low. So let's say we are now taking two demand curves where one group of people are relatively better off than the other group, and their taste and preferences are definitely different, and that is shown through two demand curves. Now we are talking about okay, so here we discuss the demand side, and now we can discuss the production side. Now when we are producing the commodity, here we are assuming when I told the theorem, I told you that that the assumption is that the marginal cost of production is constant in both regions. Get the optimal quantities, okay? And that if you allow the people of these two jurisdictions to demand the public goods given these cost of products and marginal cost of products, and then the equilibrium would be like this, okay? That the people living in jurisdiction B would be, say, demanding QB quantity of the public good, and people living in region A would be demanding, say, QA units of the public good, okay? And that means that they are demanding higher quantity, and people living in B region are demanding less quantity of the public good. And okay, so then so this is clear that if you allow the local governments, they would provide two distinct quantities, and here we can think about the consumer surplus, okay? that we will discuss later. But now assume, since we are going to discuss that it will be always more efficient for the local government to provide. Now we have to take a comparative picture that if there is a local government, if there is a centralized government, if there is central government which is providing the public good, then it will provide a fixed quantity, right? Okay? And so we can take a middle class solution that government of, say, central government fixes this quantity that say Q bar is the optimal quantity. Central government decides that it doesn't matter actually which region or which local government will provide a constant amount, fixed amount to all states, okay, or all panchayats. Okay, then in that case, say Q bar is the optimal quantity that is decided by the government. Okay, and now in this case, so we are going to, okay, so that means what is the then implication? Now people living in region B don't really want this much quantity. For them, Q bar is extra consumption, or you can say forced consumption. Okay? And similarly, for people living in region A, there is a shortfall, okay? Because they want OQA, but then government is providing only OQ bar quantity. Okay? So you can think like that so certain region people will think that no, we want more, but then government is giving us less. But certain other region people will think that no, we don't want really this much quantity. Okay? We want less, but then government is perceivably asking us to consume this. So then we are going to discuss. So in simple terms, it indicates the welfare losses, right? That in certain region people are consuming too much, which they don't want, and some other region they are demanding more quantity, but they don't get it. And so then what are the welfare losses that we are going to discuss? Okay, and that we can discuss by just by stretching this line upwards, and stretching already this demand curve is intersecting here. So we can give names. Say we can give 1 and 2 and 3 here and 4 and say here 5. 3 points. We are writing just now intersection points, and so we can take the welfare loss or the welfare gain by considering the consumer surplus. Okay. Now, what is the consumer surplus? In both regions, there is a loss. Okay, and why that we are going to discuss that. So, first we can discuss the consumer surplus or the welfare losses for the people living in region A. See, the simple logic we should use is that in both regions people are not happy, because in region A they want more quantity, but they are getting less quantity. They have willingness to pay higher quantity, but then in region B they have willingness to pay for a small quantity, but then they are consuming extra quantity. That's so it simply implies that in both regions there will be losses. Okay, and how much loss? we are going to discuss that. Now think about for the people living in region A, they want this quantity, right? O QA quantity they want, okay, and so they want to pay how much? If they will be consuming OQA quantity, marginal cost of production remains constant. How much they should pay for it? Okay, so okay, suppose this is 6, okay, or we can say, right, just P bar. So they would be paying, unit cost is OP bar, quantity they are demanding is OQA, and multiply. That means the rectangle O, P bar, I and QA would be the cost that they are willing to pay for obtaining this quantity, OQA quantity. But okay, so if they pay for this much, what will be the consumer surplus? You can stress this, right? Right? So say this would be 6.6. So if they pay for OQA quantity, then the consumer surplus will be the area O, 6, I and QA. Right? If they consume OQA quantity, the consumer surplus, okay, the utility that they will be deriving will be O, 6, I and QA. Basically the area under the demand curve is the utility that they are going to derive, right? Total utility. And if you put in a mathematical function for Amit, how do you get the total utility? No, anything. If you know the curve, then the area under the curve, basically integration, right? So if you take the integration, or you will just derive the area under the curve, then you get the total utility that they will be deriving. But then there is a cost involved. Okay? So your utility is this much, but then there is a cost component, and your cost component is O, P bar, I and QA is the cost component. And then what is the surplus? Surplus is the triangle, that is P bar, 6 and 5 would be the consumer surplus, okay, that you will be deriving if you only consume OQA quantity. But government is not allowing that. Central government is saying that you consume only OQ bar, okay, and so you are not allowed to consume this much. Now if that is the case, you will be now paying how much? Marginal cost is constant. So you will be paying now O, P bar, 1, Q bar. You will be paying. Consumer living in region A would be now paying O, P bar, 1 and Q bar. But you want how much? Okay, so what we can now, if you are consuming this area, what would be your total utility that you will be deriving? Area under the demand curve at this quantity. So you can say that O, 6, 2 and Q bar is the utility that you are now deriving. Out of which now there is a cost component O, P bar, 1 and Q bar is the cost that you are paying. So your surplus is now P bar, 6, 2 and 1 is the consumer surplus that you are getting. So you wanted this extra area. You are willing to pay, and you also wanted to enjoy this area. But government is not allowing that. The central government is not allowing, right? So if that means that is the loss, welfare loss. You are willing to pay this much and consume this much, so that your consumer surplus area would be higher. But since central government is making a uniform provision of the public good, your consumption has fallen short of your expectation, and that's why you are losing the area 1, 2 and 5 for the people living in region A. Now what about the people living in region B? is there a gain or there is a loss? There is also a loss because they don't want that much, but then government is forcing, okay, to consume this much. So similarly, we can discuss, for the people living in region B. Now say we can give 0.7 here. Now people living in region B want only OQV quantity. Now if this would be the unit of consumption, okay, for that the price would be O, P bar, 4 and QB. They would pay this much. So what would be the surplus they would be deriving? The area under the demand curve, that is O, 7, 4 and QB. That would be the utility that they would be deriving. But then there is a cost component O, P bar, 4 and QB. So the extra amount is consumer surplus. That is P bar, 7 and 4. That they would be deriving this much surplus if they consume only this much. But government hasn't allowed that. The government has said that no, you will consume little extra. Why you want small unit of consumption? You consume more. Because people living in region B are consuming. So you also consume. It's just like you give North Indians rice to consume and you give South Indians wheat to consume. This will happen. If you give uniform quantity of rice, okay, to both North Indians and South Indians in India, this will be the problem. Now here you are telling, so South people who eat more rice, you are telling them that no, don't eat rice. Now people living in North, they don't want don't want this much of rice because they consume wheat, because they need only rice on the festivals. Rajasthan people told that just like we eat wheat on Ekadashi, right? Or roti. In Odisha there is tradition on Ekadashi. People will not eat rice. They will eat roti or paratha or upma or something. The traditional food, rice is not eaten. Same thing happens in Rajasthan. Okay? When I was interacting with some people, they eat good quality of rice only on the festivals. Okay, so basmati or some good variety. So for them, this small quantity will be sufficient rice. But you have force them that you consume rice where South Indian people are consuming. So that means all people are unhappy. South people are unhappy, North people are equally unhappy. So that unhappiness can be quantified. How much unhappiness we have already quantified for people in South, region A. Now for people in North, okay. Now what is the level of dissatisfaction? So now when they are consuming OQ bar quantity, they will be paying a price for that, right? It's not free. So O, P bar, 1 and Q bar would be the price that they would be paying. Okay? And so that's the cost. Now what is the utility that they are deriving when they are consuming this much? Their utility is less than what they pay for it. And their utility would be O, P bar, 4, because this is the demand curve. So you have to look at the area under the demand curve. So the utility that they are deriving from the consumption of OQ bar is O, P bar, 4, 3 and Q bar. But they have paid a higher quantity, that O, P bar, 1 and Q bar. So then what is the deadweight loss for these people? So we can say, okay, so this is the area that say now North Indians are suffering, okay, if they are forced to consume extra quantity of rice through PDS system. So if in PDS you are saying that throughout the country per capita rice provision will be 5 kg per month, okay, then South Indians are unhappy, North Indians are equally unhappy. Better you leave it to the state or the local government depending on the local needs. In fact, you can also go a little down. Say in certain regions, people may not even want rice or wheat. They may want say millet, okay, because their traditional food is millet. For example, in fact, when we went to Raigada, we were doing a survey, and so their traditional food is millet, and millet is good. In fact, now millet is becoming rich man's food, okay, because millet has huge amount of calcium, okay, and in fact, if you consume millet for your daily requirement, it has equivalent to 5 glasses of milk, okay, calcium. If you drink 5 glasses of milk, you will get that equivalent calcium. So, but if you eat millet, anyway, so now rich people are becoming conscious of that and they are consuming more millet. So no. So coming to the local preference, I am telling that not between if you expand it to 3 consumers. Some people want rice, some people want wheat, some people want millet. Okay? So I was telling that in Rayagada, people told us that sir, our kid is now studying in a government school, okay, or in a private school. That's a boarding school. And in that boarding school, they serve only rice. They don't serve millet. So now my kid who is studying in that school is now becoming habituated with rice. Now when that kid comes to home, he doesn't want to eat millet. But millet is our basic food, okay, and we are producing millet. So what will you do with our millet? Okay. So some people would prefer millet being provided in PDS system, but that is not available in the PDS because the government has provided only one public good in fixed quantity. Okay. So there is a disutility. Now you can say that people living in region A are suffering from this much of deadweight loss. People living in region B are now suffering from this much of deadweight loss. Okay. So it is okay. So that means central provision of the public good causes welfare loss. Okay. Our objective was basically to discuss the welfare gains of multiple levels of government, okay, or the theorem of the fiscal federalism. Okay. And so we are saying that now if you do a central provision of the public good where the taste and preferences are different, so those are 2 assumptions. If you again remember the theorem that I started with in the beginning, that for any public good where the taste and preferences are different in different regions and the marginal cost of production remains constant in different jurisdictions, it will always be cost effective or beneficial for the local government to provide the optimal quantity of public good. Now optimal quantities are different. In region B, in region A, this is optimal quantity, and in region A, this is optimal B. This is optimal quantity. So it will be always effective, cost effective for the local government to provide the local public good in its own jurisdiction than the central government providing any amount of public good in at uniform level. Okay, so that is the theorem, and that we are now showing that if you allow the government to local government to provide, local government A would provide this much quantity, whether it is you can take the third demand curve. So you can say that somewhere millet is demanded, somewhere say rice is demanded, somewhere wheat is demanded. Test and preference are different. Okay, so now that is here. So this is the theorem, but then there are also some other counter arguments. Okay? People always can provide the counter arguments. So what are the counter arguments? Or this is a general theorem, but there are exceptions. Okay? So we are going to discuss those exceptions. Okay? What are those exceptions? We can discuss the first one. That is, here we are assuming that the taste and preferences are completely distinct, okay, and that is reflected in the space that will get the gap between different demand curves, okay, or the gap between the central provision and the local demands. Okay, here central provision is Q bar, but then the local demand in region A is quite far away, okay, and region B is also quite far away from the optimal quantity. But if it will be very close to the optimal quantity, so for example here, say QA instead of being here will be supposed here, and similarly the optimal quantity in region B would be supposed say will be here. Then in that case, it will not be really cost effective for the local governments to provide their own public goods. Okay. So that means the taste and preferences should be quite far away actually from the central provision quantity. Okay, so that is one. Okay, and if it is very close to the central provision quantity, okay, then it makes all sense for the central provision. Okay, and so that is the first exception that you can say. Then the second one is that here we have again assumed that the marginal cost of production remains constant. Okay, but there could be also economies of scale, right? Economies of scale. So what does it mean? I mean, when you provide in large quantity, then your cost of production goes down. And so in that case, if you allow the local governments to provide in small quantity, then you will not reach that cost advantage, okay? Or you will not get the economies of scale benefits. So, so that's a no. But here we have taken in the theorem we have taken the assumption that marginal cost of production remains constant, and but it is always commodity specific. In some commodities, your marginal cost of production would remain constant, but in some other cases it would be declining marginal cost of production. Somewhere it will be increasing. Okay, so that's you are aware of natural monopoly cases. So that in certain cases, as you go on producing large quantity, it makes all sense to provide in large quantity so that your marginal cost of production declines steadily, and you don't producing small. So we are ignoring this case that if there would be economies of scale, then this justification would simply vanish. Okay, because economies of scale will outweigh the gains from the local government provision. That is the second one. Okay, and then the third one is here we are talking about only allocative role. Okay, but what about the stabilization role, allocative role versus stabilization role? First one is taste and preferences are different. Different taste and preferences. Taste and preferences. And there is a wide gap. Okay, so coming to the third one, that here when we were discussing the role of the local government versus the central government, we only discussed the allocative role. In the beginning I have discussed that what should be the role of the central government, and there we have discussed the stabilization function, okay, that belongs to Government of India. In fact, in India also, if you look at the debates on price rise, we always blame the central government. Okay, that but in fact, the ideal combination is that both central and state governments should play together role. But usually, we say that stabilization function is always with the central government. Okay. Now, so here all that justification that we are providing holds good for allocative role. Now, for stabilization role, what happens? Now, if you leave the local governments to play their own role, okay, and take corrective measures as per their own local conditions, then your stabilization function would be ineffective. How it will be ineffective? Take the case of onion prices. Okay, in certain months, you see that in India, onion prices really bring tears. Okay, when you cut onion, or when prices are also high, without cutting onion also tears roll down. So now here, so taking the onion case, now if you take the stabilization role, what happens when onion prices rise too much? Government of India puts a complete ban on the export of onion. Maharashtra farmers protest. Okay, that because when they export, they get good prices from onion. But when Government of India puts a complete ban on the onion export, Maharashtra farmers should be unhappy. But that's how it helps the entire country, to get onion at a reasonable prices. Okay. But if we leave it to the state governments, Maharashtra people will say that no, we get better price, by exporting it. Why should we sell it in our neighboring state? If you sell it in our local neighboring local jurisdiction, you will get less prices. So just leaving it to the local government always doesn't help, particularly in the case of the stabilization function. Okay, elasticity of the demand curve. Elasticity, that is a very important point. Elasticity of the demand curves. In fact, your deadweight loss that we have shown quantity A and quantity B depends on the elasticity of the demand curve, right? Now tell me where the deadweight loss would be less. Tell me the relationship between elasticity and the deadweight loss. Deadweight loss will be higher or lower when the elasticity is higher or lower. If the elasticity is less, then the deadweight loss will be higher. If the demand curves become less elastic means it becomes almost straight line, okay, inelastic. So whatever may be the price, the doesn't respond. Okay, so that means you can say that now, see, this is the demand curve. Now suppose it becomes less elastic, it becomes like this. What happens? Then the loss area actually increases. So similarly, if it becomes, the demand curve becomes like this, then the loss area becomes higher. Okay, so your arguments or justifications for say the local government would also be determined by the elasticity of the demand curve. Why I am saying, now if you say that your demand curves are perfectly elastic, say almost like this, then what happens? Then your area of loss would be very small, right? And here also it is like this, then area would be only this much. Okay? So that means, just like here, we are saying that if your taste and preferences are very close to the central provision, then the arguments for the decentralization would become weak. Similarly, if your demand curves are perfectly elastic or very close to or you can say highly elastic, then also the arguments, justifications for decentralized government would become also weak. Okay? Yeah, so those are the four exceptions to the theorem of fiscal federalism given by Wallace E. Oates. Clear? So this anyway, you can directly read the article of Wallace E. Oates' book 1972, or the article published in 1999. Or if you want to get the textbook, I am referring to the book John Pullis and Philip Jones. That's a book on public finance. Okay, so I stop there.